The air was thick with tension. A cold, unsettling silence enveloped Earth as the Draconian fleet, a force known across the galaxy for its sheer might, entered Earth's atmosphere. Massive ships, dark as night, hovered ominously above the planet, their metallic hulls glinting in the harsh light of the distant sun. These beings had conquered countless worlds, leaving nothing but death and devastation behind. They were here to do the same. Humanity was unprepared. No one could have predicted the scale of this invasion. The Draconians' reputation was one of swift, overwhelming force, and Earth was just another prize for the taking. Cities, once bustling with life, now stood in fear as the first broadcasts from the alien fleet crackled over the emergency channels. The message was simple: surrender or be destroyed. The planet had less than an hour to comply. In every corner of the world, governments scrambled to organize a defense, but it was clear Earth's military might was no match for the advanced Draconian technology. They had cloaking devices, AI-controlled warships, and energy weapons that could vaporize entire cities with a single shot. The planet's defenses were far too primitive. Panic spread like wildfire, and the mood was one of hopelessness. The skies darkened as the Draconian ships began their attack. Earth's major cities were the first to feel their wrath. The first orbital bombardment hit the heart of New York. Explosions lit up the sky, the ground shaking violently as skyscrapers crumbled into dust. It was as if the world was coming to an end. In the midst of the destruction, Bonner, a young soldier, found himself standing in the wreckage of what was once a thriving city. His unit had been stationed in the area, but there was no longer any sign of life. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the sky now a menacing shade of orange. He stared up at the Draconian ships above, their silhouettes blocking out the sun. His heart pounded in his chest. He had been trained for situations like this, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was witnessing. The earth trembled as more bombs fell. The Draconians' firepower was overwhelming. He watched as a building collapsed not far from him, sending debris scattering in every direction. In the chaos, Bonner's thoughts raced. Were they going to lose? Was humanity about to be wiped from the face of the earth? He glanced over at his fellow soldiers, their faces etched with fear and disbelief. There was no hope now. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, everything stopped. The Draconian ships vanished. In the blink of an eye, they were gone. No explosion, no sign of their departure. It was as if they had never been there at all. Bonner blinked, confused, trying to process what had just happened. The skies, once filled with enemy ships, were now empty. The distant hum of destruction had faded to silence. For a moment, it was as if the earth itself was holding its breath, unsure of what had just occurred. Had they left? Was it a retreat, or was this some kind of trap? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Bonner's mind was a whirl of confusion, but he knew one thing for certain: humanity was still alive. For now, at least. As the dust settled and the echoes of the bombardment faded into nothingness, Earth's survivors began to question what had just happened. Was it possible that the Draconians had underestimated them? Or was there something more to this sudden disappearance? The global response was immediate. Emergency broadcasts flooded the airwaves as world leaders and military commanders scrambled to understand the situation. Panic and confusion reigned, but there was a strange sense of relief too. Humanity had survived the first wave of the invasion, but for how long? The Draconians hadn't left out of mercy. They hadn't withdrawn because they feared Earth's defenses. No, something had stopped them. But what? As the hours passed, the answers started to emerge, and with them, the realization that humanity was far from helpless. A group of scientists, working with military forces, discovered the shocking truth. The Draconians hadn't disappeared on their own. They had been forced to. Earth had a secret weapon. Beneath the surface, hidden from the eyes of the invaders, lay the very thing that had kept the planet from being wiped out. Cloaking technology, long since developed by Earth scientists, had rendered the Draconian fleet invisible to their own sensors. It was an unthinkable turn of events. Humanity, it seemed, had not been as defenseless as the Draconians had assumed. And the timing of the attack, a calculated move. Earth's leaders had known the threat was coming for years, and now, at the darkest hour, humanity had made its move. Bonner, still in the ruins of the city, watched the broadcasts with disbelief. The same planet that had been on the brink of destruction was now a force to be reckoned with. The Draconians, it seemed, had underestimated Earth's ingenuity and hidden strength. But this wasn't over. Earth's defenses had barely held up, and the Draconians were not known for their mercy. As Bonner stared up at the empty sky, he knew that this was just the beginning. The real war was about to start. And this time, humanity would not be caught off guard. The disappearance of the Draconian fleet was just the first sign that Earth was far from defeated. The aliens had underestimated humanity, and they would soon learn just how dangerous this primitive species could be. The aftermath of the Draconian fleet's sudden disappearance was filled with confusion and uncertainty. Earth's cities lay in ruins, and survivors had barely begun to process the horror of the initial assault. However, amid the chaos, there was a strange sense of hope. The Draconians were gone, at least for now. But why had they left? Was it a temporary retreat, or had something happened that they hadn't anticipated? In the following days, governments and military leaders scrambled to make sense of what had occurred. The Draconians, despite their overwhelming technological superiority, had failed to destroy humanity. And this wasn't a victory that could be celebrated yet. It was merely the beginning of a much larger battle. But Earth wasn't as vulnerable as it seemed. Beneath the surface of the devastation, humanity's hidden strength began to surface. For years, in the shadows, Earth had been preparing for this very moment. Scientists and military leaders had been quietly working on technologies that could level the playing field, knowing that one day, a force like the Draconians might come to challenge them. The planet had been deemed a Deathworld by the rest of the galaxy, dangerous, unpredictable, and hostile. Its harsh environments and chaotic ecosystems had forced humanity to adapt in ways other civilizations couldn't fathom. While the Draconians focused on superior weaponry and brute strength, Earth's greatest weapon had been its people. Humans had learned to survive against all odds, developing technology that would allow them to hold their ground, even in the face of an alien invasion. As the Draconian fleet vanished into thin air, a group of Earth's top scientists and engineers began to understand what had truly happened. The cloaking technology that had concealed the fleet was no accident. It wasn't a mere coincidence that the Draconians had suddenly vanished. Earth's scientists had secretly developed a cloaking device that was able to interfere with the Draconian sensors. They had been hiding in plain sight, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The revelation came as a shock to the world. The Earth that had been bombarded with Draconian firepower was not defenseless after all. Humanity had built a powerful network of underground bunkers, research stations, and experimental military technologies hidden from prying eyes. The Draconians, believing that Earth was simply a backward, primitive world, had underestimated the planet's hidden potential. Humans didn't just fight back with technology. They fought with the environment itself. From the jungles to the mountains, from the deserts to the oceans, Earth's harsh landscapes had become the perfect training ground for humanity's toughest warriors. With the knowledge that they were fighting for their survival, humans adapted, using the terrain to launch guerrilla attacks. The Draconians' sophisticated machines were slowed down by Earth's unyielding landscapes. They couldn't predict the way humans moved and hid within their own planet. Meanwhile, Bonner and his squad had become the symbol of humanity's newfound resilience. They were the first to encounter the cloaked Draconian ships after the fleet's mysterious disappearance. With Earth's advanced technology at their disposal, they managed to infiltrate a Draconian outpost, planting EMP devices that disrupted the fleet's control over their war machines. The humans had struck the first blow, but the battle was far from over. The Draconians were quick to adapt, sending more ships to Earth's orbit and retaliating with even greater force. The humans, though small in numbers compared to the Draconians, had discovered a way to use eye-controlled warships to their advantage. For years, humanity had been working on robotic technology and artificial intelligence to level the playing field. These warships were equipped with cloaking abilities of their own, allowing them to engage the Draconians in ways that no one could have predicted. Earth's warships, while not as advanced as the Draconian fleet, were built with human ingenuity and adaptability in mind. Bonner's team, now equipped with the latest human-made technology, launched an assault on a Draconian supply ship. The battle took place in the skies above what was once a peaceful town. The human ships cloaked, invisible to the Draconians, allowing them to get close without being detected. The fight was fierce, with lasers cutting through the air and explosions shaking the earth beneath them. But despite the overwhelming odds, Bonner and his squad managed to board the Draconian ship, planting explosives and sabotaging their weapons systems. As the humans gained small victories, it became clear to the Draconians that Earth was no longer the helpless planet they thought it was. They began to question their own superiority. How could a species they considered insignificant be so resourceful and clever? The Draconian fleet had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they were now facing something much more dangerous, an enemy that couldn't be predicted or easily crushed. The human counterattacks began to disrupt the Draconian plans. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, the humans would surprise them. Human ingenuity, resourcefulness, and the ability to turn their own planet into an ally had shifted the balance of power. Earth's most advanced technology wasn't its weapons. It was the resilience of its people, the way they used everything around them to fight back. They weren't just defending their planet. They were fighting for their survival, and that gave them a strength no alien fleet could ever have predicted. Despite the setbacks, the Draconians weren't about to give up. They sent in more warships, prepared to crush the humans and their newfound resistance once and for all. But Earth's response was quick and decisive. The humans had unlocked their greatest weapon, a fleet of eye-controlled ships capable of challenging the Draconians on equal terms. These warships, with their advanced cloaking technology, were able to infiltrate the Draconian fleet undetected and strike from within. The first battle between the human and Draconian ships was a sight to behold, with both sides unleashing everything they had in a battle that would determine the future of Earth. The humans had revealed their true power, their ability to adapt, to survive, and to use every tool at their disposal to fight back. What had once seemed like a hopeless situation was now a battle for the future of the planet. The Draconians had underestimated humanity, but now they were about to learn just how dangerous Earth truly was. The war was no longer about surviving the first strike. It had become a fight for Earth's future. Humanity had barely recovered from the initial Draconian assault, and yet the battle was far from over. The Draconians weren't retreating. They were regrouping, preparing for another, even deadlier wave of destruction. The first assault had been a test, and Earth had passed it, barely. But the Draconians would not let their defeat go unanswered. Across the globe, humans began to rebuild, but their rebuilding wasn't just about physical structures. It was about strengthening their defenses, fine-tuning their newly discovered technologies, and preparing for the fight that was about to come. Earth's greatest weapon was no longer just its secret cloaking devices or its eye-controlled ships. It was the human spirit. The battle had transformed from one of pure survival into one of defiance. Humanity's resilience was now their most powerful weapon. The Draconians, on the other hand, were relentless. They had underestimated Earth's resourcefulness before, but they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Their new fleet, larger and more advanced, arrived in orbit around Earth within days. The sheer size of the fleet was enough to make any soldier feel a sense of dread. The Draconians were bringing everything they had, and Earth's defenses would be tested like never before. In a dimly lit command center, Bonner and his squad were briefed on the new threat. The Draconians had brought reinforcements, massive warships armed with energy shields, faster attack drones, and devastating weapons that could obliterate entire cities in an instant. The hope that had bloomed after the Draconian fleet disappeared was now being replaced by fear. But Bonner refused to let that fear take hold. He had seen too many comrades fall to give up now. The Resistance had made significant progress in developing tactics to counter the Draconians' advanced technology, but the odds were still stacked against them. The fight was no longer just about firepower. It was about strategy. The humans had learned to fight using their environment, blending into the terrain and using their knowledge of the planet to their advantage. The jungles, the deserts, and the mountains all became weapons in their own right. The Draconians, with their superior technology, were not equipped to fight in a world as unpredictable as Earth. Bonner's squad, equipped with cloaked human warships, prepared to launch a daring mission. Their target was a Draconian command ship, a massive vessel that coordinated the fleet's movements and directed their attacks. If they could take it down, they could disrupt the entire Draconian operation. But the mission was risky. The Draconians had learned to detect cloaked ships, and they were prepared for an assault. The humans would have to be faster, smarter, and more ruthless than ever before. As Bonner and his team boarded their cloaked ship, the tension was palpable. The mission was their best shot at winning the war, but it also carried a heavy cost. Each of them knew that they might not make it back alive, but there was no turning back now. The fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. The battle for survival began as the human ships slipped undetected into the Draconian fleet's perimeter. The stars above were dotted with the glowing lights of enemy warships, but the humans remained hidden, moving like shadows among the giants. Every decision had to be made in an instant. One wrong move, and the entire mission could be compromised. When they reached the Draconian command ship, Bonner's heart raced. The massive vessel was surrounded by a swarm of smaller drones, each one more dangerous than the last. The humans couldn't afford to engage them directly. They had to stay hidden and rely on their skills. Bonner gave the order to split the team, sending one group to plant explosives on the ship's hull, while he and a small team of soldiers moved inside, hoping to sabotage the ship's control systems. The inside of the Draconian ship was a maze of cold, metallic corridors and harsh, glowing lights. The ship was unlike anything Bonner had ever seen. The Draconians had perfected every inch of their vessel, from the AI-driven systems to the advanced weapons that lined the walls. The humans were intruders in a world that was not meant for them, but that didn't stop them. They pressed on, each step calculated, each breath held in anticipation. They reached the central command room. Bonner's squad set to work, planting explosives and hacking into the Draconian systems. But just as they were finishing, the ship's AI activated, locking down the area and alerting the Draconians to the intrusion. Bonner's heart sank as the alarms blared, but they couldn't turn back now. The team fought their way through the corridors, dodging enemy fire as they made their escape. Meanwhile, outside, the remaining human warships were engaged in a brutal firefight with the Draconian drones. The AI-controlled ships moved with precision, evading laser fire and striking back with deadly force. It was a desperate battle, one that would determine if the humans could survive the Draconian onslaught. The drones were relentless, but the humans had learned to fight in ways the Draconians couldn't predict. Every strike was a reminder of their determination to protect their home. Back inside the Draconian ship, Bonner's team reached the final stage of their mission. With the control systems sabotaged, the ship's power began to fail. They had done it. The Draconian command ship was on the brink of collapse. But just as they prepared to leave, a blast echoed through the corridors, knocking them off their feet. The explosion had triggered a chain reaction, and the ship began to fall apart. Bonner's squad fought their way to the exit, narrowly avoiding death as the ship's hull buckled under the pressure. With the command ship destroyed, the Draconian fleet was thrown into disarray. The humans had struck a major blow, but it was only the beginning of the war. The Draconians were not going to give up easily. As Bonner and his squad returned to Earth's atmosphere, battered but alive, they knew one thing for sure. The battle for survival was far from over. The Draconians had learned a painful lesson. Earth's people were not as weak as they thought. The war had only just begun, and the humans were ready to fight to the very end. The fight for Earth's future would continue, and humanity's resilience would be its greatest weapon. The battle had raged for days, but in the midst of the fierce fighting, a deeper cost was becoming clear to everyone. It wasn't just the lives lost during the fights. The emotional toll on the survivors, especially the soldiers, was something that couldn't be measured in any battlefield statistics. Earth's defenses were stronger than ever, but so were the scars of war. Bonner's team, who had just managed to destroy the Draconian command ship, returned to base battered and bloodied. They were hailed as heroes by the survivors who had seen the incredible mission as the turning point in the war. But to Bonner, the victory felt hollow. He had seen too many of his comrades fall in the chaos of battle, and the weight of their loss hung heavily over him. Every soldier knew the risks, but that didn't make the grief any easier to carry. When Bonner stepped into the base's med bay, the first thing he saw was Sarah, a young soldier who had been part of his squad from the beginning. She was unconscious, a bandage wrapped around her head, her body bruised and battered. Sarah had been one of the few survivors of an ambush during their last mission. The ambush had been brutal, and she had barely made it out alive. Bonner couldn't help but feel responsible for what had happened. He had made the decision to send her and the others into the heart of danger, and now Sarah was fighting for her life. The emotional cost of war was not something that could be ignored. For every victory, there was a loss. Every battle won meant another face they wouldn't see again. Bonner's thoughts drifted back to Jenkins, one of the soldiers who had fallen during the command ship mission. Jenkins had been a quiet, steady presence in the team. He had been the first one to volunteer for the most dangerous assignments. And now he was gone, lost to an explosion that had nearly torn their group apart. Bonner could still hear Jenkins' voice in his head, joking around before the battle began. "Don't worry, Bonner. We got this. I've got your back." Those words had been the last Bonner heard from his friend before the chaos erupted. Now, Bonner couldn't shake the image of Jenkins' body, lying motionless on the battlefield, his final words unfinished. The grief was suffocating. But it wasn't just the deaths that haunted him. It was the aftermath, the guilt, the knowledge that they had fought with everything they had, only to lose so many along the way. There was a constant weight on his chest, a feeling that he wasn't doing enough, that he wasn't saving enough people. It was a burden that every soldier carried but rarely spoke about. Bonner wasn't the only one feeling it. Sarah, when she regained consciousness, would have to face the same struggle, the same unanswered questions. At the base, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone had seen the destruction of the Draconian command ship as a win, but behind the triumph, there were whispers. How many more lives would be lost before this war ended? Could humanity truly win? Or was this just a temporary respite before the Draconians regrouped and attacked with even more force? Everyone was scared, but no one wanted to show it. Instead, they worked, repaired, and strategized, trying to prepare for the next battle that was sure to come. Bonner and his team spent hours analyzing the information they had gained from their mission. The Draconians had lost their command ship, but they weren't defeated. They were regrouping, building up their forces, and preparing for the next assault. The Draconians had always believed that their technological superiority made them invincible, and now they were angry. They had learned that humanity wasn't just a helpless species, it was a force to be reckoned with. But what good was that if it meant losing more lives? As Bonner sat in the command room, staring at the map of Earth and the Draconian fleet's movements, a sense of hopelessness started to settle over him. The longer the war went on, the more humanity would lose. It wasn't just soldiers like Jenkins who would fall. It was civilians, families, entire communities. The emotional cost was becoming too great to ignore. People were fighting for survival, but what kind of survival was it if they lost everything in the process? Sarah's recovery was slow. Bonner visited her every day, talking to her even though she couldn't respond yet. The guilt gnawed at him, making him wonder if he had pushed her too far, sent her into danger she wasn't ready for. She had been eager to fight, eager to protect her home, but no one could truly understand the cost of war until they were living it. As the days passed, Earth's soldiers prepared for the next wave of Draconian attacks. They had no choice but to keep fighting, but the toll it took on them was undeniable. Every face in the room showed signs of exhaustion, of fear, of grief. The soldiers were becoming weary, their hope diminishing with each passing battle. They fought not just for victory, but for those who had already fallen. They fought because they had no other choice. But deep down, they knew that victory would never come without sacrifice. The war wasn't just taking lives, it was taking their humanity. The soldiers became less like people and more like machines, their emotions numbed by the endless cycle of violence. Each victory felt incomplete without the ones they had lost. The faces of their fallen comrades, like Jenkins, haunted them. They couldn't forget, but they couldn't stop fighting either. As the weeks dragged on, Earth's resistance grew stronger, but so did the emotional scars. The fight for survival wasn't just about the physical battle. It was about holding on to something, anything, that reminded them of who they were before the war began. For Bonner, it was the memory of Jenkins' smile, of Sarah's laughter. He held on to those memories like a lifeline, knowing that if they didn't, they would lose more than just the war. They would lose everything they had fought for. The emotional cost of the war was higher than anyone had imagined, and the final victory, when it came, would never erase the pain that came with it. The battle for Earth was not just a fight against an alien enemy. It was a fight for the very soul of humanity. The final battle was unlike anything Earth had ever faced. The Draconians had assembled their fleet for one last strike, a last-ditch effort to crush humanity once and for all. The war had dragged on for months, leaving both sides battered, but the Draconians believed their technological superiority would finally end the conflict. The humans, however, had learned, adapted, and most importantly, survived. Bonner stood at the command center, staring at the holographic display of Earth and the incoming Draconian ships. The mood was tense. This would be the final clash, the moment where everything they had fought for would either be lost or won. The countdown to the battle had begun, and the soldiers around him were preparing for the hardest fight of their lives. Their bodies were exhausted, their minds on the edge of breaking, but there was something in their eyes. Determination. They had fought too hard, lost too much, to back down now. In the hangar, the warships were lined up, ready for battle. The cloaking devices had been upgraded after the previous fights, and the human ships were now faster and more maneuverable than ever. But despite these improvements, Bonner knew the Draconians were still a formidable force. Their warships were enormous, bristling with weapons capable of wiping out entire cities with a single blast. The stakes had never been higher. Bonner looked around at his team. Sarah, though still recovering from her injuries, had insisted on joining the mission. Her eyes were filled with a fire that reminded Bonner of the young, eager soldier who had first joined the fight. She wasn't the same person anymore. No one was. The war had changed them all, but in Sarah, Bonner saw the spark of defiance that had kept humanity alive throughout the conflict. Jenkins' absence weighed heavily on her, but she was ready to honor his memory by giving everything she had. "Are you ready?" Bonner asked her, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. She nodded, tightening her grip on the controls. "Let's finish this." The rest of the team joined them, each one taking their position in the ships. The mission was simple, yet incredibly dangerous. Infiltrate the Draconian fleet, disable their flagship, and buy Earth's forces enough time to launch a full-scale counterattack. It was a suicide mission, but they had no choice. If they didn't take action now, humanity would be wiped out. The Draconians would continue their relentless march, and there would be no more Earth, no more humanity. As Bonner and his squad launched into space, they felt the weight of the mission settle on their shoulders. The vastness of space stretched out before them, a cold, unforgiving expanse. But despite the overwhelming odds, Bonner had one thought that kept him going. They had already beaten the Draconians before. They could do it again. The human ships, cloaked and silent, slipped past the Draconian defenses. The Draconians were powerful, but they had never encountered humanity's ingenuity and cunning. For every advantage the Draconians had, the humans had something unexpected. Whether it was their knowledge of Earth's terrain or their ability to improvise in the face of danger, humanity had always found a way. This mission was no different. As they neared the Draconian flagship, the tension in the air was palpable. The flagship was surrounded by dozens of smaller ships, drones, and defense systems, all primed and ready to attack. The Draconians had clearly learned from their previous losses, and their defenses were tight. There would be no easy way in. Bonner's heart pounded in his chest as he gave the order to engage. The first shots fired were from the human warships. Energy blasts streaked through space, lighting up the darkness. But the Draconians didn't respond immediately. Instead, their ships scattered, preparing for a counteroffensive. Bonner's team moved quickly, darting between enemy ships, their cloaked vessels slipping in and out of the chaos. It was a battle of survival now. Who would make the first mistake? Bonner's team had no room for error. Every move had to be precise. Every strike had to count. They couldn't afford to lose anyone else. As the human ships danced around the Draconian fleet, it became clear that they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting for their very existence. The Draconians, seeing their forces spread thin, began to regroup, calling for reinforcements. The battle was escalating rapidly, and the human ships had to act fast. The team's mission was clear: destroy the flagship's control systems and cripple the Draconians' ability to command their fleet. It wasn't an easy task, and it wasn't without risk, but it was their only chance. Bonner's ship moved toward the flagship, dodging enemy fire as they approached the massive vessel. The closer they got, the more they could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on them. The Draconians weren't going to give up easily. As they neared the flagship's hull, Bonner gave the order to deploy the boarding pods. The pods launched with a deafening roar, shooting toward the Draconian flagship. The team inside was ready. They knew what they had to do. As the pods slammed into the flagship's outer hull, Bonner and his squad leaped into action, pushing forward through the cold metal corridors. The ship's defenses were fierce, but the humans were fueled by a single unshakable belief: Earth was worth fighting for. The battle inside the flagship was brutal. The humans fought their way through wave after wave of Draconian soldiers, their weapons clashing in the tight corridors. Sarah fought alongside Bonner, her resolve unshaken despite the chaos around her. They had lost so much already, but they couldn't stop now. As they reached the control room, Bonner felt a surge of hope. The Draconians hadn't expected them to get this far. With the control room in sight, they launched the final assault. The ship's systems began to malfunction, the lights flickering as the Draconians struggled to maintain control. The flagship was falling apart, and with it, their hopes of victory. In the final moments, as the Draconian flagship's core began to destabilize, Bonner's heart pounded. This was it, the moment that would decide the fate of humanity. The Draconians were finished. The Earth was safe, for now, but the cost of victory had been immense. As the flagship exploded in a blinding burst of light, Bonner and his team made their way back to their ship. The battle was over, but the emotional scars would last a lifetime. They had won, but they had lost so much in the process. Earth's survival had come at an immense cost, and the journey was far from over. As they flew back to Earth, Bonner looked around at his team, each one of them forever changed by the battle. They had fought for their homes, their families, and for each other. They had won the final clash, but the true cost of war was still ahead of them. The Draconians had been defeated, but humanity had paid the price. The war was over, or at least it seemed to be. The Draconian fleet was destroyed, their flagship reduced to debris floating in the cold vastness of space. Earth's defenses had held, and the invading forces that once seemed unstoppable were now nothing more than a memory. Bonner sat silently, staring out of the command center window, watching the stars flicker in the distance. For a moment, there was a feeling of peace, a fleeting, fragile peace, but deep down, Bonner knew it wouldn't last. Nothing ever did. The cost of victory had been too high. His mind kept drifting back to the faces of the fallen. Sarah's strength, Jenkins' laugh, and the countless other soldiers who had given everything to defend Earth. They had all fought bravely, but at what cost? Many of the survivors had changed. Some had become hardened, their spirits dulled by the never-ending battle. Others, like Bonner, had grown quieter, more introspective. Victory had come, but it had come with a heavy price. As Bonner made his way through the base, he could feel the tension still hanging in the air. There were celebrations, of course, cheers from the soldiers, quiet conversations about how they'd defeated the mighty Draconians. But for Bonner, it felt like there was nothing to celebrate. The victory had cost so much. The loss of comrades, of friends, had left a scar that couldn't be healed by any victory. Bonner entered the medbay, where Sarah was recovering from her injuries. Her wounds had been serious, but she was a fighter. She had survived, even when it seemed like she wouldn't. Bonner took a seat beside her bed, looking down at her, still unconscious, but alive. Her breathing was steady now, and the pale, fragile look she had worn during the battle was slowly fading. He smiled faintly, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Bonner whispered under his breath. "I didn't want it to be this way. I didn't want you to lose so much. But we couldn't stop. You kept fighting. You kept going. And for that, we all owe you everything." As Sarah slowly regained consciousness, Bonner knew that things could never go back to the way they had been before the war. She would remember the battle, the loss, the sacrifice. And like him, she would carry the weight of it for the rest of her life. But there was still a glimmer of hope. They had won. Earth had survived, even if it had come at the expense of so much. Later that day, Bonner stood before the memorial wall in the base, a place dedicated to the fallen soldiers. He had visited this wall more times than he cared to count, but each time, the weight of it hit him harder. The names on the wall were more than just names. They were faces, lives, memories of people who had given everything to protect Earth. And yet, as Bonner stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. The sacrifices, the bloodshed. It had been worth it to ensure that Earth would survive, but what kind of world had they won? He touched the name of Jenkins, the soldier who had been by his side from the very beginning. Jenkins had been more than a teammate. He had been a friend, someone who had understood the pain and weight of the fight. Now his name was carved into the wall, along with the others who had given their lives for a cause that seemed so distant, so abstract. "Jenkins, we did it," Bonner whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "But it's not the same without you." As he left the memorial, Bonner's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He couldn't escape the feelings of loss, the heavy burden of having lived through something so tragic. But there was something else, too, something that he couldn't ignore. The fight was over, but the future remained uncertain. What would Earth be like after the war? Could they rebuild from the destruction, or had the damage been too great? The soldiers around him were struggling with the same questions. Some of them had become quiet, withdrawn, unable to process the enormity of what they had experienced. Others had found a strange sense of peace, knowing that their loved ones would be safe. But for Bonner, there was still a gnawing feeling that victory had been a double-edged sword. It wasn't just about defeating the Draconians. It was about healing the wounds that the war had inflicted on their souls. In the days that followed, Earth began to rebuild. The war had left its mark on every city, every nation, but the human spirit had proven stronger than even the most advanced alien forces. People came together, helping each other as they had done in times of crisis before. The soldiers who had fought in the war returned home, some to families they hadn't seen in years, others to rebuild their lives from scratch. But Bonner knew that they could never truly go back to the way things were. The world had changed. They had all changed. The rebuilding process wasn't easy. The scars left by the war were everywhere, in the ruined cities, in the empty homes, in the eyes of the survivors. But as Earth began to heal, there was a sense of unity, a shared understanding that they had survived the impossible. They had fought against an overwhelming enemy, one that had seemed invincible, and they had won. And though the losses had been immense, there was something beautiful in the way humanity had stood together. Bonner and Sarah both knew that they would carry the memories of the war with them forever. They would never forget the faces of the fallen, the battles they had fought, the sacrifices they had made. But there was something deeper now, something that transcended the pain. They had fought for their world. They had fought for their future. As the years passed, the story of the war became a part of history. Earth had defeated the Draconians, but the true victory was not just in the battle. It was in the resilience of humanity. The sacrifices of the soldiers, the loss of so many lives, had given Earth a chance to rebuild, to rise again. It was a victory that could never be fully understood by those who hadn't lived through it, but it was a victory nonetheless. For Bonner, the victory wasn't in the defeat of the Draconians, but in the fact that Earth still stood. The human spirit had survived. And as he looked out at the horizon, he knew that whatever the future held, humanity would face it together. They had sacrificed everything, but they had also shown the universe that they would never give up, no matter the odds. And that, in the end, was the true victory.